The cold fluorescent lights of the clinic cast everything in that particular shade of sickly blue-white as Natalie stared at the grainy black and white image in her hand. A baby, her baby, a tiny bean-shaped cluster of cells that would become a person, growing inside her just 8 weeks along. Manhattan glittered around her as she stepped out into the late September rain, the ultrasound printout tucked safely in the inner pocket of her coat. The city lights reflected in puddles like scattered stars, beautiful and completely indifferent to her crisis. 4 weeks. That's how long ago James had disappeared without a trace after nearly a year together. No calls, no texts, nothing, just vanished, leaving behind half-empty drawers in her apartment and a void of unanswered questions. Her tiny apartment greeted her with the same empty silence that had become her constant companion. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, but it was hers, at least until rent was due again in 3 more weeks. The ultrasound had been the last thing she wanted to do today, but her doctor had insisted after confirming the pregnancy test results. "Let's make sure everything's developing correctly," she'd said gently, probably seeing the panic in Natalie's eyes. She needed to tell someone before this burden crushed her. Her best friend, Rachel, was traveling for work somewhere in Europe with spotty reception, but she'd want to know about the pregnancy and James's disappearance. With trembling fingers, Natalie pulled out her phone and took a photo of the ultrasound. She opened their message thread, attached the image and typed, "Wish you were here. I could really use my best friend right now. I'm pregnant, Rach. James is gone. I don't know what to do." The little whoosh sound as the message departed carried a strange finality with it. It was real now. She had told someone. She set her phone down and dragged herself to the shower, letting hot water cascade over her until her skin turned pink. When she emerged wrapped in her threadbare towel, she heard her phone chime from the living room. That was fast. Maybe Rachel was awake despite the time difference. She padded across the cold floor, leaving damp footprints behind her. The notification made her heart stop. It wasn't from Rachel. It was from a number she didn't recognize with a New York area code, and the preview showed 3 words that made no sense. Is it mine? Somehow, in her exhausted emotional state, she'd sent the most intimate message of her life to the wrong number. "I'm so sorry. Wrong number. Please ignore," she quickly typed. The response came immediately. "Who is this?" She hesitated, then wrote, "Just someone who made a mistake. Sorry to bother you." The 3 dots appeared indicating the stranger was typing. "You texted James Holloway's old number," came the reply, and the room seemed to tilt around her. That was impossible, unless James had changed his number, unless the number she'd been texting for the past 4 weeks had never reached him at all. "How do you know James?" Natalie typed with shaking hands. The response took longer this time, each second stretching painfully as she watched the typing indicator appear and disappear. "We had business together. He owes me. A lot." Natalie's throat went dry. James was an investment banker, or so he'd claimed. They'd met at a coffee shop near the financial district, his expensive suit and confident smile a stark contrast to her bargain rack dress and nervous demeanor. "What kind of business?" she asked, though a voice in her mind screamed at her to stop, to block this number, to forget this conversation was happening. The answer chilled her. The kind people don't walk away from. "I don't know where he is," she typed truthfully. "He disappeared 4 weeks ago. I haven't heard from him since." The response was immediate. "But you're carrying his child." The certainty in those words made her skin crawl. Before she could respond, another message appeared. "You live at 1843 Astoria Boulevard, apartment 4B. You work at Hazen Wilson Law Firm on 52nd Street. You leave your apartment at 7:15 every morning and stop at the corner cafe for a large vanilla latte." Ice flooded her veins as the next message came through. "I know everything about you, Natalie Reynolds. And now I know about the baby, too." They knew her name. They'd been watching her for how long? Days? Weeks? "What do you want from me?" she managed to type, her fingers numb with fear. The answer came swiftly. "Information. James stole something valuable before he ran. 2 million in data that could destroy everything I've built. I want it back." "I don't have any money or information," she protested. "I barely knew James, it seems. Whatever he took, he didn't give it to me." The typing indicator appeared again, disappeared, then reappeared. "Maybe you don't know you have it. We need to talk in person." The sudden pounding at her door made her scream. "Miss Reynolds," a deep voice called through the thin wood. "We need you to come with us." She backed away, looking frantically for a weapon, her phone, anything to protect herself. "I've called the police," she lied, her voice breaking. A laugh from the other side. No, you haven't. Now please open the door before we open it for you. The man's voice became softer, almost gentle. Mr. Blackwood sent us to bring you to him. He's very interested in meeting the mother of his business partner's child. As they escorted her downstairs and out to a black SUV with tinted windows, Natalie caught sight of something that hadn't been there before. The sleek, menacing silhouette of a private jet waiting on a nearby airstrip, its engines already humming with anticipation. The jet sliced through the night air with a rhythmic hum that vibrated in Natalie's chest as she sat rigidly on the leather seat. Through the window, she watched New York City transform beneath them, the familiar grid of streets shrinking away as they rose higher, the city becoming a sprawling constellation of lights. They approached what appeared to be a large estate north of the city, situated on a cliff overlooking the Hudson River. A landing strip glowed with perimeter lights on impeccably manicured grounds, the property radiating the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. A slender woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun met them at the entrance. "Ms. Reynolds," she acknowledged with a slight accent Natalie couldn't place. "Follow me, Mr." Blackwood doesn't like to be kept waiting. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Soaring ceilings, marble floors, artwork that looked museum quality. Yet despite the grandeur, there was a sterility to the place, as if it were a stage set rather than a home. "Who is Mr. Blackwood?" Natalie finally asked, her voice sounding small in the cavernous space. The woman didn't slow her pace or turn around. "You'll find out soon enough." She led Natalie to a set of double doors at the end of a long hallway, where she stopped and knocked softly. After a moment, she opened one door and gestured for Natalie to enter before closing it behind her, leaving her alone in what appeared to be a study. The man who entered moved with the quiet confidence of a predator, unhurried, deliberate, aware of his power. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered but lean, dressed in a charcoal suit that had clearly been tailored to fit his frame perfectly. Dark hair with threads of silver at the temples framed a face that might have been carved from stone, all sharp angles and planes, with deep-set eyes that studied her with unsettling intensity. This, then, was Blackwood, and he didn't look like what she'd imagined a mob boss would look like. "Miss Reynolds," he said, his voice a low baritone with just the faintest trace of an accent. "Thank you for joining me this evening," as if she'd had a choice. He gestured to one of two leather armchairs positioned near the unlit fireplace. "Please sit." "Where is James?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Blackwood studied her for a long moment, taking a sip of his drink before answering. "I was hoping you might tell me that. I told you already. I don't know. He disappeared 4 weeks ago. No warning, no explanation." Her voice cracked slightly. "I thought he loved me." A bitter smile curved his lips. "James Holloway is very good at making people believe what he wants them to believe." "What did he do to you?" she asked, clutching the water bottle he'd offered tightly. Blackwood leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "James worked for me for 5 years. He was brilliant with numbers, with finding patterns where others saw only chaos. I trusted him with my financial operations. And then 4 weeks ago, he disappeared with 2 million of my money and information that could destroy everything I've built," Blackwood continued, watching her reaction carefully. "The question, Ms. Reynolds, is how much you know about any of this." "Nothing," she insisted, her voice steadier than she felt. "I thought he was an investment banker. We met a year ago, started dating. He moved some things into my apartment 6 months ago, but kept his own place too. He said it was closer to work. I guess that was just another lie." "You never questioned where his money came from? The lifestyle he maintained?" Natalie looked down at her hands, shame washing over her. "I assumed he was good at his job, that he came from money. I didn't want to look too closely. Things in my life were finally going well. And now you're pregnant with his child," Blackwood stated, his gaze dropping briefly to her stomach. Natalie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He stood suddenly, moving to the windows, his back to her as he looked out at the river. "Do you know why I brought you here, Natalie?" The use of her first name startled her. It sounded intimate, almost tender coming from him. "Because you think I have what James stole?" she answered. "But I don't. I would tell you if I did." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I believe you, but James Holloway will come back for you, and when he does, I'll be waiting." Understanding dawned, horrible and clear. "You're using me as bait. I prefer to think of it as providing you with protection while we both wait for James to make his next move," Blackwood replied. "If I hadn't sent my men to collect you, Someone else might have. James didn't just steal from me. He sold information to rivals who wouldn't hesitate to use you to get to him. For the next 3 weeks, Natalie lived in a strange limbo of luxury and confinement. Her gilded cage was comfortable beyond anything she'd experienced, but it was a cage nonetheless. She was permitted to walk the grounds during daylight hours, always with security personnel nearby. She could read books from Blackwood's extensive library, watch television in a lavish media room, even swim in the indoor pool overlooking the river. But she couldn't leave or contact anyone from her former life. Her old existence was slipping away like sand through her fingers. Each evening, Blackwood would join her for dinner, their conversations gradually evolving from tense silence to cautious exchanges. He was surprisingly well-read, knowledgeable about art, literature, and history, a cultured man beneath the dangerous exterior. "You have an appointment tomorrow," he informed her one evening as they finished their meal. "With my personal physician. She'll be conducting an ultrasound to check on the baby's development." His casual control over her life should have angered her, but the genuine concern in his voice was confusing. The ultrasound revealed a healthy 12-week fetus, its tiny heart beating steadily on the monitor. Natalie had wept at the sound, overwhelmed by the reality of the life growing inside her, while Blackwood had stood silently by, his expression unreadable but his presence oddly comforting. That evening, Elena, the silver-haired housekeeper, delivered an envelope to Natalie's room. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a printed message. "I know where you are. I'm coming for you. Tell no one. Jay." Her heart raced as she read the words, hope and fear warring within her. James had found her. He knew she was with Blackwood, and he was planning to rescue her, or so she thought. She hid the note beneath her mattress, unsure whether to tell Blackwood or trust that James truly had her best interests at heart. The next morning, she found another note tucked into her breakfast tray. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., the garden gazebo. Be there alone." Her fingers trembled as she quickly destroyed the evidence, burning it in the bathroom sink before anyone could discover it. When tomorrow came, she made her way to the garden, telling the guard she needed fresh air. The gazebo stood empty when she arrived, but moments later, a groundskeeper approached, removing his hat to reveal James's familiar face beneath a poorly applied disguise. "Natalie," he whispered urgently, taking her hands. "Thank God you're all right. We don't have much time. I've arranged for us to escape tonight. Meet me by the east gate at midnight. There'll be a car waiting." His eyes drifted to her now visible baby bump, something unreadable flashing across his face. "Is it true?" he asked softly. "You're pregnant?" Natalie nodded, watching his reaction carefully. "Yes, 12 weeks now. I found out after you disappeared." He looked away, guilt evident in his expression. Or was it calculation? "We need to get you away from Blackwood," he said, squeezing her hands. "He's dangerous, Natalie. The things he's done, the people he's had killed. You and our baby aren't safe here." The conviction in his voice almost convinced her. "Why did you leave without telling me?" she demanded. "Why disappear for nearly 2 months?" James glanced around nervously. "I had to protect you. Blackwood was suspicious, watching me. I needed to secure our future first, set up new identities, a place for us." His explanation sounded rehearsed, hollow somehow. Over the weeks with Blackwood, she'd learned to listen for the silences between words, to notice the subtle tells of deception. "How did you find me?" she asked, testing him. "I have contacts inside Blackwood's organization," James replied too quickly. "They told me he'd taken you, that he was using you to get to me. But I've got a plan, Natalie. Trust me one more time. Midnight tonight, the East Gate. I'll be waiting with our future." As midnight approached, Natalie paced her room, conflicted about James's plan. She'd spent hours weighing her options: escape with a man who had abandoned her once already, or remain in Blackwood's luxurious prison where, despite everything, she felt strangely protected. At 11:45, she slipped on a dark sweater and soft-soled shoes, tucking a small flashlight she'd taken from a kitchen drawer into her pocket. The hallways were dimly lit, but not entirely dark. Security cameras mounted discreetly in corners tracked her movement. She navigated through the kitchen where she'd memorized the blind spots in the surveillance system during her weeks of careful observation. The night staff had retired to their quarters, leaving only the occasional guard patrolling the perimeter. The garden path was illuminated by soft ground lighting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Natalie's heart hammered in her chest as she crept toward the east gate, staying close to the hedges to avoid detection. The cool night air carried the scent of pine and distant water, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of constant surveillance inside the mansion. Crickets chirped in rhythmic waves, occasionally falling silent as Natalie passed, nature's own alarm system sensing her intrusion into the night. A security light swept across the lawn in predictable intervals, forcing Natalie to time her movements with practiced precision. During her walks, she had carefully counted seconds between patrols, noted the rotation of guards, identified the cameras that occasionally froze for system updates. Her pregnancy had given her an unexpected advantage. The guards had grown accustomed to her unusual sleep patterns and midnight walks, attributed to her condition rather than suspected planning. One guard had even mentioned his wife's similar restlessness during her pregnancy, unwittingly providing Natalie with the perfect cover story. James was already waiting, a hooded figure beside a section of wall where the security lighting had mysteriously failed. "You came," he whispered, relief evident in his voice as he took her arm. "Quickly now. There's a gap in the patrol schedule." He guided her through a narrow opening in the gate that had clearly been tampered with. Beyond the wall, a nondescript sedan idled in the shadows, its engine running quietly. "Almost there," James murmured, his grip tightening on her arm. As they approached the vehicle, the driver's window rolled down, revealing a hard-faced man with a scar along his jawline and cold eyes that assessed Natalie with clinical interest. "This her?" he asked in a heavily accented voice. "Yes," James replied tersely. "Let's go." Something in the exchange made Natalie falter. The man wasn't looking at her with the indifference of a hired driver, but with the calculated interest of someone appraising valuable merchandise. "James," she said slowly, pulling back slightly. "Who is this?" James's face tightened with impatience. "Just a friend helping us get away. Come on, we don't have time for this." He tugged her forward more forcefully than necessary. The pieces suddenly fell into place with horrifying clarity. The Russian accent, the predatory assessment, the too convenient escape plan. "You're not running from the Russians," she whispered, horror dawning. "You're working with them." James's expression confirmed her suspicion before he could deny it. "It's complicated, Natalie. Blackwood was going to kill me. I needed protection. The Bratva offered me a deal, the information and half the money in exchange for their help." "And me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Was I part of the deal too?" His silence was answer enough. "The child is valuable to them," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Insurance that I'll continue to cooperate. They won't hurt you, not if you're carrying my baby." The cold calculation in James's words turned Natalie's blood to ice. He was selling her, selling their unborn child to the Russian Mafia as leverage. The man she had loved was nothing but a monster in familiar skin. Suddenly floodlights illuminated the area, momentarily blinding them. "Security breach at the east gate," a voice announced over an unseen speaker. The Russian driver cursed, reaching for what Natalie instinctively knew was a weapon. James yanked her roughly in front of him, using her as a shield as he backed away from the vehicle. "Stay back!" he shouted into the darkness. "I'll hurt her!" Natalie felt something hard press against her side. A gun she hadn't known he was carrying. "Let her go, James." The voice was calm, authoritative, cutting through the chaos like a blade. Blackwood emerged from the shadows, his posture relaxed, but his eyes deadly serious. "It's over." Behind Blackwood stood a semicircle of security personnel, their weapons drawn but held at careful angles. Trained professionals who understood that Natalie's safety was the priority. Among them, she recognized Elena, the silver-haired housekeeper, now holding what appeared to be a small tactical device. Floodlights from multiple angles eliminated all shadows, creating a stark tableau against the estate's stone wall. James trapped in a pool of unforgiving light that revealed every twitch of desperation on his face. The Russian driver remained in the vehicle, hands visible on the steering wheel, a red laser dot dancing on his temple. Night birds scattered from nearby trees, their wings creating momentary shadows across the scene, nature itself seeming to recoil from the human drama unfolding below. The estate's warning system emitted a low, persistent tone that Natalie had never heard before, a sound she would later learn signaled a breach of the innermost security protocols. "Stay back, Blackwood," James called, his voice edged with panic. "I'll do it, I swear to God!" Blackwood continued his slow approach, his gaze locked on James. "No, you won't, because the moment you harm her, you lose your only bargaining chip." Natalie could feel James's heart hammering against her back, his breath coming in rapid gasps as his carefully constructed plan disintegrated. "I want safe passage," he demanded. "A car, clear roads to the harbor. Then you get your flash drive back. Blackwood stopped about 10 feet away, his expression almost pitying. You really don't understand your position, do you? The Russians have abandoned you. Your driver is being detained. My men control every exit. There is no escape. In the split second of James's distraction, Natalie drove her elbow back into his solar plexus with all her strength, a move Blackwood had taught her during one of their self-defense lessons. James's grip loosened just enough for her to tear free, dropping to the ground as security personnel swarmed forward. They subdued James with brutal efficiency, disarming him and forcing him to his knees. Blackwood appeared at Natalie's side, helping her to her feet with surprising gentleness. Are you hurt? He asked quietly, his eyes scanning her for injuries. No, she whispered, though in truth she felt broken in ways that had nothing to do with physical pain. Blackwood nodded, his expression softening slightly. You did well, Natalie. Very well, playing along until you were certain of his intentions. She looked up at him, suddenly understanding. You knew he would try to contact me. You let it happen. Blackwood didn't deny it. James was always predictable in his desperation. Using you and the baby as leverage was exactly the kind of gambit he would attempt. What happens now? Natalie asked as the SUV pulled away from the scene, leaving James in the custody of Blackwood's security team. Blackwood was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the night landscape passing outside the window. That depends on you, he said finally. The immediate danger has passed. James will give us what we need to neutralize the Russian threat. You could return to your life if that's what you want. The offer of freedom should have filled her with joy, but instead, it left her feeling strangely hollow. Return to what? She asked softly. My tiny apartment? My mundane job? A life where I would raise a child alone, always looking over my shoulder? And if that's not what I want? She asked, hardly believing her own boldness. Blackwood turned to her then, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then perhaps we could come to another arrangement, one that ensures the safety and security of both you and your child. 3 months later, Natalie sat on the terrace of what was now her home, watching the sunset paint the Hudson River in shades of gold and crimson. Her hand rested on her now prominent baby bump, feeling the occasional flutter of movement from within. Inside, preparations were underway for a gallery opening. Blackwood had discovered her talent for art curation and had helped her establish connections in the New York art world. She was building a new identity, one that belonged entirely to her rather than being defined by James or even by Blackwood himself. Elena approached with a glass of sparkling water, placing it beside Natalie on the small table. Mr. Blackwood called. He's on his way back from the city and asked if you would join him for dinner. Their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. Not quite romance, not merely protection, but a partnership built on mutual respect. Blackwood, Daniel, as she now called him, had shown her glimpses of the man behind the powerful facade, the son of immigrants who had built an empire through equal parts brilliance and ruthlessness, who collected art not as a display of wealth, but out of genuine appreciation for beauty. Daniel had introduced her to his sister, Sophia, a warm, elegant woman who ran an international children's charity, and who had welcomed Natalie without judgment or suspicion. Through this connection, Natalie had begun volunteering her organizational skills, finding purpose in helping coordinate art therapy programs for traumatized children. The nursery overlooked the East Gardens, where gardeners were creating a small butterfly sanctuary, Daniel's subtle gift to the unborn child, ensuring her first memories would include beauty and natural wonder rather than the concrete and noise of city life. Rare flower species from around the world had been carefully selected for their colors and blooming cycles. Natalie's legal identity had been quietly reinforced through a series of strategic moves orchestrated by Daniel's team of attorneys, her employment history enhanced, her educational credentials verified, her financial standing secured. She was no longer the vulnerable administrative assistant, but a woman with a documented history of accomplishment and a clear path forward. She had learned that his business operations, while not entirely legal, were far more complex than simple criminality. He operated in gray areas, exploiting loopholes in financial regulations, providing services to those excluded from legitimate banking, a modern-day Robin Hood in some ways, though she harbored no illusions about the violence that sometimes accompanied his work. James had been dealt with, not killed as she had initially feared, but sent far away with a new identity, and the clear understanding that returning would mean his death. The Russians had been neutralized through a combination of strategic information sharing with authorities and private arrangements Natalie preferred not to know the details of. The baby would arrive in 4 more months, A daughter, according to the latest ultrasound. Daniel had already prepared a nursery more luxurious than anything Natalie could have imagined, though he insisted he expected nothing in return beyond allowing him to be part of the child's life in whatever capacity Natalie deemed appropriate. As she sipped her water and watched a hawk circle lazily over the river, Natalie reflected on the strange twist of fate that had led her here. A mistaken text message had completely altered the trajectory of her life, bringing her from a place of vulnerability and isolation to one of power and belonging. She still remembered that moment of terror when the men had first arrived at her door, the helicopter waiting to carry her away to an unknown fate. Now, that same machine occasionally transported her to gallery openings in the city, to weekend retreats in the Hamptons, to a life she could never have imagined for herself. The future remained uncertain in many ways. Her relationship with Daniel was still evolving, the boundaries still being negotiated. But for the first time since discovering her pregnancy, Natalie felt hope, not just for survival, but for a life filled with purpose, protection, and perhaps even love. Thank you all for following this story to its conclusion. If you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe,